Okay, let's unpack something truly fundamental about being human. This idea that even when things are just completely horrific, we can still find meaning, a purpose.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
And that's really the core of what we're getting into today. For you listening, if you want to get the essence of things quickly, we're digging into the key ideas from a landmark book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Right, and what's so compelling about this source is, it's this blend. It's his own deeply personal experience, but also his rigorous psychological thinking.
Because he was a neurologist, a psychiatrist.
Exactly, and he lived through the Nazi concentration camps. He didn't just survive. He was observing, thinking, formulating his whole approach, logotherapy, right there in the midst of it all.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And, his background, that trained mind facing that kind of reality. The book itself, too, it's had this amazing life.
Hasn't it?
Written in just 9 days, back in '45.
Right.
Apparently, he first wanted it published anonymously.
Can you imagine? And then it becomes this massive bestseller.
Which says something, doesn't it, about a universal human question, this sort of deep need to understand, the meaning of it all.
It absolutely does. Frankl himself said the popularity may be pointed to a kind of misery of our time, this real hunger for purpose.
So our mission today, then, is to really explore Frankl's account, what it means to be human under that extreme pressure, and the main principles of logotherapy.
Specifically, how people can find meaning, maybe even create meaning, when just everything seems lost.
Okay, so where do we start? Auschwitz. That arrival.
I think we have to. That selection process he describes, just a finger pointing, left or right.
Life or death, decided instantly.
Yeah.
But they didn't know at first, did they?
No, not immediately. The meaning of that gesture, the horrifying truth about the chimney, the crematorium, that became clear soon enough. Devastatingly clear.
And right then, on top of that terror, he has this huge personal loss. His manuscript.
Yeah, the work he called his life's work, gone.
So it's not just losing freedom, it's losing something core to your identity, your purpose. It's, almost unimaginable.
It really highlights the initial assault psychologically. What gave his life meaning before all this? But then, despite that, Frankl sees something crucial about human nature.
Which is?
Adaptation. How prisoners could actually adapt to these utterly inhumane conditions. Sleep crammed together, the filth, the lack of food.
9 people to a couple of blankets on bare boards, he wrote. It makes you think of that Dostoevsky quote.
Man can get used to anything.
Yeah, but Frankl adds that really crucial bit. But do not ask us how.
Exactly. It speaks volumes, doesn't it, about just the raw will to endure when you absolutely have to.
In that context, suicide must have been constantly present.
Oh, absolutely. Frankl mentions making a conscious choice early on not to run into the wire, the electrified fence.
A quick way out.
Yeah, but that choice, even then, rooted in his ideas about meaning, it shows that spark, doesn't it? That will to live even when hope seems gone.
Survival often boiled down to just appearance, didn't it? That term Muslim.
Chilling, yes. Used for someone who just looked completely broken, emaciated, unfit for work.
And if you were labeled that,
you were almost certainly marked for the gas chamber, so just getting through the day wasn't enough. You had to look like you were useful. It's profoundly dehumanizing.
What does that tell us about how life was valued there? Or rather, devalued?
Completely devalued. And the beatings, another constant horror. Frankl points out that the psychological part, the insult, the degradation, that often felt worse than the physical pain.
Even simple tasks, like carrying something, could be deadly if you slipped up.
Right. Mistakes could bring down brutality on everyone involved.
And then within the prisoners themselves, you have this hierarchy. The capos.
Yeah, prisoners given authority. And Frankl observed, sometimes chosen specifically for their cruelty, they could be even more brutal than the SS guards.
It's a bleak picture, isn't it? How that kind of pressure can corrupt. How the fight just to survive can turn people against each other.
Absolutely. And that struggle even extended to things like the transport selections.
Yeah.
Being chosen to go to another camp, which was often just a death sentence in disguise.
What happened then?
He describes this desperate, free fight, everyone scrambling, trying to get their name off the list, maybe a friend's name too, knowing full well someone else would just take their place.
Just pure atomized desperation.
Exactly. Defines camp life.
But amidst all that darkness, Frankl also saw these sources of strength, of meaning, memories of loved ones, right?
Hugely important. He talks so vividly about his wife and this realization he had That love, real love, goes beyond the physical. It exists in the spiritual core of the person.
Even not knowing if she was alive.
Even then, he'd have these internal conversations with her, feel her presence. It gave him incredible strength. It really speaks to the power of our inner connections, doesn't it?
It really does, that inner life.
And Frankl saw that deepening in many prisoners, this surprising inner strength, despite the external horror. He even noticed this paradox.
What's that?
That sometimes the more sensitive people, the more intellectual ones, they actually coped better in some ways by retreating into that inner world, finding a kind of spiritual freedom the guards couldn't touch.
And it wasn't just love. He mentions other things too, art even.
Yeah, like hearing a violin playing some sad tango, and humor, even tiny sparks of humor. He called them weapons of the soul.
Weapons of the soul, I like that. He even tried to teach a friend to find something funny about their future liberation.
Yeah, like imagining the ridiculous situations they might find themselves in. It was a way to mentally escape, to hold on to some sense of self.
How important is that, do you think? Finding those little moments.
I think it's vital. It shows that resilience and gratitude, too. Gratitude for tiny things.
He talks about negative happiness.
Right. Just the absence of suffering becoming this huge relief. Or seeing a cook distribute soup fairly, that becomes a major event, a moment of human decency, unexpected gratitude.
And that yearning for just a moment alone, away from the constant crowds.
Yes. He describes finding these brief moments near a water shaft, thinking of home. And interestingly, that little space also became a place where he could act bravely, help other prisoners secretly.
So even in that tiny bit of privacy, the impulse to connect, to do something meaningful, was still there.
Absolutely. And all these observations, they led him to this core idea, the fundamental importance of inner choice, of spiritual freedom.
That even when everything else is taken away.
You still have the power to choose your attitude, your mental stance. It brings back that Dostoevsky quote he thought of often.
Not to be worthy of my suffering.
Exactly. Finding dignity, finding purpose, even in the face of the unbearable.
Which leads us right into logotherapy, his whole psychological framework. He sets it apart from Freud, right? The will to pleasure.
Right. And Adler's will to power, or, striving for superiority. Logotherapy is different. It centers on the will to meaning.
So what's the key difference there? Is it just another drive?
Frankl argues it's the primary drive. This will to meaning isn't just a side effect of other things, it's fundamental, as basic as pleasure or power.
And as personal.
Deeply personal, unique to each of us. It's not something you get from outside, it's something you have to discover or maybe fulfill yourself. He even pushed back against the idea that our values are just like defense mechanisms. He said we can live and die for our ideals.
Because it talks about existential frustration. What's that?
That's what happens when this will to meaning gets blocked. And it can lead to what he called neurogenic neuroses.
Neurogenic.
Meaning?
Stemming from the mind, or the spirit news. So these neuroses aren't just about psychological conflicts like Freud might say. They're about this lack of meaning, these deeper existential questions.
Can you give an example? How would that look different?
Well, he tells the story of this American diplomat who was really unhappy, discontented. Traditional therapy might look at his childhood, his relationships.
But logotherapy found the root was that he felt his job lacked purpose. It felt meaningless to him. Once he shifted his career to something he did find meaningful, the discontent vanished.
So it wasn't a classic neurosis, but an existential one.
Exactly. His core need for meaning wasn't being met.
So how do we find this meaning then? He gives 3 main ways, doesn't he?
Yes. First, by creating something, a work, a deed, achieving something. Making your mark, basically.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, by experiencing something or encountering someone. And here he puts a really strong emphasis on love. Love as this primary, profound experience.
Not just a side effect of sex, for example.
No, he saw it the other way around. The
Yeah.
physical expression, sex, becomes meaningful when it's an expression of that deeper connection of love.
And the third way. This one feels crucial given his experiences.
It is. It's the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering.
How we choose to face it.
Precisely. He uses the example of the elderly doctor grieving his wife. Frankl helped him see his suffering differently as the price he paid, which spared her the pain of surviving him.
Wow. So that reframed his grief.
It gave it meaning, profound meaning, and Frankl famously said, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning.
It gives you a lot of power, doesn't it, to reframe things.
Immense power. He also talks about this idea that having been is also a kind of being. What do you make of that?
Like, the past isn't just gone. It's part of you.
Exactly. The experiences, the things you've done, the love you felt, even the suffering you endured. It's all part of your reality permanently. It shapes who you are. It's irreplaceable.
And that connects to having a future goal, too, right? He quotes Nietzsche.
He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow. Yes, absolutely vital. For Frankl himself, in the camps, that why was his determination to rewrite his lost manuscript.
That kept him going. How essential is that, do you think, that future focus?
Oh, critical. Having a purpose, something to aim for, it gives you direction, motivation, even when things are terrible. It's something to hold on to.
Now, logotherapy also has specific techniques, like paradoxical intention. Sounds paradoxical.
It is. The idea is to consciously wish for the very thing you're afraid of.
How does that work?
He gives the example of a doctor terrified of sweating too much. Frankl told him to try to sweat profusely to show people how much he could sweat. By intentionally trying to do it, maybe even humorously, the anxiety cycle was broken and the excessive sweating actually stopped. You kind of disarm the fear by meeting it head on, almost absurdly.
Interesting. And the other one, dereflection.
That's about shifting focus away from yourself, especially if you're hyper-focused on a problem or a symptom.
Like anxiety about anxiety.
Exactly. Or he gives the example of a woman struggling with sexual frigidity. By focusing less on her own response and more on her partner, on the connection, she found fulfillment naturally, spontaneously. Too much self-observation can get in the way.
So logotherapy has this guiding principle too, this sort of commandment.
Ah, yes, the categorical imperative of logotherapy. Live as if you were living already for the second time.
And as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now.
Whew! That's intense.
It is, but it's a powerful call to responsibility, isn't it? Think about the finality of life, the impact of your choices. If you imagine looking back on this moment, how would you act now?
Makes you think. And that responsibility links to self-transcendence, right? That we don't find fulfillment by focusing on fulfillment.
Exactly. Frankl argued that self-actualization, becoming your best self, isn't something you aim for directly. It's a side effect.
A side effect of what?
Of dedicating yourself to something beyond yourself. A cause, loving another person, serving a purpose greater than your own ego. Focus outward, and growth happens naturally.
He also talks about a super meaning, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Something maybe beyond our grasp. Yes, acknowledging that there might be an ultimate meaning that we can't fully comprehend intellectually. He tells that sweet story about his daughter asking why God gave her measles.
Right, illustrating the limits of our understanding.
Yeah.
A kind of humility.
Exactly. And this leads to his idea of tragic optimism.
Optimism despite tragedy. Pain, guilt, death.
Yes. Finding meaning in spite of all that. Seeing suffering as a potential achievement, guilt as an opportunity to change, and life's finiteness as a reason to act responsibly now.
He warns against chasing happiness directly, though. Calls it hyperintention.
Right. Happiness tends to sneak up on you when you have a reason to be happy, when you're engaged in something meaningful. It's not the goal itself.
And the opposite, that give-up-itis he saw in the camps.
That's what happens when meaning collapses. People lose that future orientation, that why, and just focus on immediate pleasure, often right before, well, before the end. A devastating loss of hope.
He saw conscience as a guide, pointing towards meaning.
Like an inner compass, yeah.
Right.
Prompting us toward what is meaningful for us in a given situation. And he shares these incredible stories of the defiant power of the human spirit.
People who maintain their dignity against all odds, like Jerry Long, the Polish cardiologist.
Yes. People who showed what he called attitudinal heroism, choosing how to be, even in hell.
What does that say about how much control external forces really have?
It says our inner freedom, our ability to choose our response, is ultimately untouchable. Frankl strongly rejected pan-determinism, the idea that we're just products of our environment or biology.
He believed in free will, fundamentally.
Yes. In our capacity for self-determination. He tells that complex story of Dr. J, the mass murderer of Steinhoff, who apparently showed real humanity later in prison. It shows it's not simple.
Humans are complicated.
Very. And this belief in freedom and choice led Frankl to say we need a statue of responsibility on the West Coast to balance the Statue of Liberty on the East.
Freedom and responsibility.
Hand in hand. He concludes, really, by saying, humans have the capacity for both the best and the worst, being saints or swine. And it comes down to our inner decisions, not just our circumstances. He mentions Father Maximilian Kolbe as an example of saintly sacrifice.
Amazing. Okay, so finally, what about after liberation. What was that like for the prisoners?
It wasn't always that sudden burst of joy you might expect. He describes this initial numbness and inability to really feel pleasure, like they had to relearn how to be happy.
The body reacted first.
Oh yeah, ravenous eating. The physical deprivation ending led to this overwhelming urge to consume.
And a need to talk.
An intense need to finally let out everything that had been suppressed for years.
But some felt disillusioned.
Yes, a feeling that just returning to normal life couldn't possibly make up for what they'd suffered. That earthly happiness felt shallow, maybe?
And the danger of revenge.
That too, tragically. Some liberated prisoners wanted to inflict pain as they had suffered. Frankl emphasizes the need to guide them back, that being wronged doesn't give you the right to do wrong. A crucial, difficult lesson.
So, wrapping this up, bringing our exploration to a close, the core message from Frankl seems to be this constant possibility of finding meaning.
Yes, it's not passive, it's active. We discover it, we create it. Through our attitude, especially towards suffering, through love, through meaningful work.
And that inner freedom, that responsibility, it's always there, no matter what's happening outside.
That's the fundamental takeaway. Even when facing the absolute worst, that capacity for meaning remains. It's a powerful source of resilience.
So for you listening, these ideas aren't just about extreme situations. They offer this really powerful way to look at your own life, your own challenges.
Absolutely. A way to actively seek and build purpose, whatever your circumstances. Understanding this is maybe a shortcut to appreciating our own potential for strength.
And it definitely leaves us with something to think about.
It does. A question for all of us, really.
So here's that final thought for you to chew on. Given that life is temporary, with all its ups and downs, its joys and inevitable sorrows, what meaning will you choose to create, to actualize today? Maybe take some time to reflect on Frankl's ideas, perhaps even pick up Man's Search for Meaning yourself.